You're listening to Town Hall Symphony Hall, Birmingham's world-class concert halls.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Hart. I'm one of Chris Morley's team of reviewers at the Birmingham Post. The other people on the platform, I'm sure, don't need any introduction at all, particularly Tamsin Waley-Cohen, who is this afternoon's soloist. And this fellow over here, who I'm sure you've seen before, is David Curtis, the conductor.
Allegedly.
Let's start with you, Tamsin, if I may. He's reading his fan mail, so we'll leave him to it. I was looking you up, as I do, and I got here on a piece of paper a quotation that I found.
Oh my goodness.
And it said, "I love the live experience, the alchemy and creativity of the moment." And I was wondering, if you rehearse a lot, does it make it easier or more difficult to get that feeling?
It makes it easier, in my opinion. I think freedom comes from solid foundations and having worked together with your musical partners, whether that's with a conductor in an orchestra or with one other person or a few other people. If you have a really shared vision, that trust in each other on stage gives you the freedom to really be able to create in the moment. And I think the audience can really feel that and be part of that. And I think that's one of the beauties of live performance, is it's created for that moment, and it can only happen once, and then it's gone and it stays there in the memory or as a feeling, but not as an actual object.
If you repeat the performance as you are doing, this is a repeat of a concert yesterday evening in Stratford, will it be the same then, or will it be a different sort of alchemy?
It will be different. I think it's always different. We're in a different hall, different day. People will be feeling different. But I also really believe in creating something fresh every time you go on stage, not trying to reproduce a product, but really living the moment and giving the music and the people that are there to share it with you that freshness that it deserves.
Just at the end of the rehearsal today, we were saying to the orchestra that, well, and you said, we agreed that whatever Tamsin does this afternoon, the rehearsal, I think the rehearsal for me, it's about exploring parameters, sharing ideas, trying things out, but it's absolutely not, well, this is what we did this morning, and it's got to be like that this afternoon, and because it's, as you said, and I think you used exactly the same expression, that said that the performance, it's a creative process. It's not just taking something out that we did earlier. But I often think about the business of discipline and creativity and freedom, that Morecambe and Wise, everything, and Tommy Cooper, everything looked spontaneous and slapstick, but everything, I understand, was absolutely rehearsed meticulously, which then enabled that creativity to happen, I think.
But I think there was an element of improvisation on the day.
But I think it's the same in musical performances, where you can do that improvisation if you've got that absolutely solid foundation underpinning it. Otherwise, and certainly as a conductor, sometimes you work occasionally with soloists who just go off, and you've no idea where they're going.
Is it scary when that happens?
It's terrifying. Yeah, it really is, because it hasn't happened for some time. Maybe I'm just better at picking soloists now, but there's one particular person who I find it terrifying, and we don't work together now, because the rubato, with Tamsin's rubato or shaping or whatever, I always know exactly where it's going, and I know it's going to go there. There's a musical logic. I mean, logic's not quite the right word, perhaps, but you know where the phrase is going, and it doesn't matter how much time or playing around. There is that flow, musical, but with other people, perhaps because there is this lack of real understanding and discipline underpinning it, it's terrible. You just no idea where the music's taking you.
This is probably a challenge for you, isn't it?
Which?
Well, if we get a conductor like David, he says, I know exactly what they're going to do.
Yes, I'm a bit concerned now.
Well, I know.
I
you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, and I mean, discipline's the name of the game as a performer, isn't it? It's the practice and the studying, and that is, as David said, that is to enable the creativity and the real understanding of the score, and that freedom in the moment.
Another question I wanted to ask you is, do you have any conflict between the need to play works that people know, particularly if you're going to do a recording, and the sort of thing that you would like to do? Because I've looked at your list of CDs. Recently, well, it's not a CD, but at least recently you did a concert with the Czech Philharmonic. It was a debut concert with them, and that was the first performance of a new violin concerto by Richard Blackford.
That's right.
What was that like? The experience and also the work.
Yes. They're a really wonderful orchestra, and they don't actually do that much new music, so it was quite a big thing for them to have commissioned this work. Luckily, the orchestra really warmed to it. It's a very, very dramatic piece because it's telling the story of the myth of Niobe, and the violin actually plays the part of Niobe. So the first sort of movement is Niobe as the lover, and then Niobe as the blasphemer, the sort of show off, the flirt, and then Niobe pleading for the life of her children and herself, and then the last movement is when she's turned into this rock to cry tears forever, and she realizes there's no escape. So it's incredibly dramatic, as you can imagine. A very big orchestral texture, particularly with the percussion. And we had, of course, a few days to rehearse it before the premiere, and then went back for the recording. It's always quite like launching into the unknown to premiere a work, because it only really comes alive in performance how much you've rehearsed it. So that's incredibly exciting, but also often a bit scary. And then, of course, with the recording, we had time to, go over things, and the composer was there, so to get it exactly.
So it was I thought it was a concert, but it was a
It was
recording.
both, actually.
Oh, I see.
So we premiered it on the Saturday, and then on the Monday we recorded it.
Yes. How did the audience react to it?
They actually really loved it, because they're not, again, the Czech audience, particularly the Czech Phil audience, is not that used to new music. They've generally quite conservative programming. But they actually reacted very, very warmly to it, and gave us lots of curtain calls and seemed to really respond to the piece.
So it's obviously an accessible piece.
It is. It's not. It doesn't sound like it's from another era. It sounds very much of today, but it is accessible. And I do think there's a huge movement in what's being written today, particularly with the younger generation of composers, to go back to music which is more human, more directed by emotion, perhaps a little bit more basis in tonality or rhythm that can be grasped straight away, not to take away in any way from the profundity of it, but to move away from this very cerebral school, which has dominated so much, of course, particularly since the Second World War, and I think beginning to win back the trust of audiences, which will take a long time, but there's so much really beautiful, meaningful, touching new music being written, and it is the music of today.
It's interesting, though, how music changes its perception, isn't it? Because think of the Berg concerto. I'm sure when it was first performed, it alienated a lot of people, and yet it's the most wonderful piece.
Very beautiful. Or Stravinsky, Rite of Spring, or even late Beethoven quartet.
Yes.
Absolutely. I think perception really does change. Of course, it's impossible to know what will be remembered in 100 years' time. But I do often think, if someone said to you, "Oh, I'm certainly not going to read a book or look at a painting that was written in the last 80 or 100 years," you'd think they were mad. But people often say that about music, and I think that's a real shame.
Yes.
I think it's strange, but that music in particular, and perhaps it is because so much. Well, no, I'm not even sure it's because music has been so abstract. Because you go to the Tate Modern on a Sunday afternoon, and it's rammed full of people enjoying very contemporary art
And very nice cafe and
a very
shops.
nice, and there's something, I think, somehow that we need to learn from the contemporary art world. And I think even contemporary dance, tends to get a bigger mainstream audience. And actually, one piece, because Tamsin hasn't mentioned that her sister actually is a fantastic composer.
I was going to mention that.
Yes. And Freya and I were talking about a work that we may still perhaps commission that took something from the art world. Because I think the great thing about contemporary art, you can sit and look at it, and you can look at it for 10 minutes, half an hour, you can go away, you can have a coffee, you can come back, re-examine it. You can't really do that with a piece of music because it's gone. So Freya's idea...
You can do it with a recording, though.
You can, but even, yes, you can. And Freya's idea was that we should take something from the art world and we would have dotted around the concert hall. So she would write a new work for us. Dotted around the concert hall would be various groups from the orchestra rehearsing various sections, and the audience would be invited to go, or just go around and listen to the flutes practicing over there, and listen to and just spend an afternoon doing that, and then hearing the whole work rehearsed and then performed, trying to recreate that ability to go and go and listen to the bit of the flute there, and that little detail in the painting over there. So hopefully we'll try and do that.
That sounds brilliant.
David,
It's Freya's idea.
Yeah, she's full of brilliant ideas.
Yeah, and of course you've recently recorded a work of your sister's
That's right.
called Permutations.
That's right.
And that's inspired by architecture, I believe.
Yes.
And the other thing is you're the only performer, but
Yes.
you're heard more than once. Can you explain that?
Yes. So this is a project that we developed over a number of years together with two architects, Andrew Sculina and Finbarr Dempsey, at Aldeburgh sort of residency. They gave us what they call an open space residency, which means they just give you as much support as you need, access to different experts, and you can go up and work on it. And in fact, the music and the architecture would develop simultaneously. So it's a piece which is for 6 solo violin voices. Each one of them is housed in its own acoustically separate chamber, all made up of rotating doors. So there's over 70 rotating doors with different acoustic surfaces on each side of them. So if you stand in the middle of the structure, you hear all 6 voices equally. And you can walk into one of the chambers, open the doors, close some other doors, sort of mix the 6 voices in any way that you want. So as the listener, you play the architecture as if it was an instrument, and you are an integral part of the creative process and how you experience the work. And so everyone's experience of it will be really quite different. So the recording was a quite challenging sort of project because it was very different from usual, because it was like going into recording without ever having rehearsed, because I couldn't rehearse with myself, obviously. So we had to do it layering the different parts over each other. So on the CD you hear the 6 parts sort of perfectly balanced as they would be in the ideal of the composer's mind. But when you go and interact with the architecture, it's a very different experience, and you have to be an active participant. People have had really great reaction to it, so it will actually be touring around the UK starting in the summer.
So the record only gives an idea of the proper work?
Yes.
Unless you've got surround sound. Has it been recorded in surround sound?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
But not very many people have that.
No.
Yes, it does. The thing is, the work is not at all a sound installation. It's a really serious sort of 20-minute piece, very contrapuntal. It's in many ways takes a lot from Beethoven's Grosse Fugue. There's intervallic palindrome at the beginning of the fugue subject, which Freya also uses in the opening and main statement, which is woven in different ways throughout the piece.
Did you enjoy doing it, or was it a big challenge?
It was a huge challenge. It was way out of my comfort zone,
yes.
particularly the recording, but I absolutely loved it.
Did it involve improvisation, or was it all notated?
It was all notated. It was all notated. Although the year before, Aldeburgh commissioned a piece for one solo violin and 5 pre-recorded parts, which was sort of, if you can imagine, 5 microphones around this hall. So, for example, if you're sitting over there in that corner, you would be very close to, number 2 microphone, but very far away from number 5 microphone, and you'd really feel that difference in the space.
Are you noting all this down? Because
I'm really looking forward to working with Freya.
I have to say, rehearsing that was not. We had about an hour to get in with the tech guys before the concert the next day, because it's such a tight schedule there, and that was quite exciting. But we managed it.
Yeah. You're looking at the rest of your CDs, or the ones that I've taken note of. You've done a CD of works by John Adams and Roy Harris,
Yes.
with the BBC Symphony, Penderecki, Elliot Carter, George Benjamin. A CD called Bohemia, works by Janacek, Dvorak, Suk, with Hugh Watkins,
That's
who's a
right.
regular.
My long-time partner in crime.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. He's a fine pianist.
He certainly is,
And
and
a composer, yes,
He certainly
indeed,
is.
yeah. What about the great, if you like, or the well-known classics? We're hearing Mozart today.
Yeah.
You play Beethoven.
Yes.
You've recently done the Mendelssohn
Yes.
Concerto. Are there any of the great classics that you haven't yet explored?
Many of them, I think.
What about the Brahms?
I have played the Brahms a number of times. I think one of the wonderful things about being a musician is there's always more great repertoire to explore. And I think violinists are particularly lucky in the concerto repertoire with 20th century repertoire. So there's a number of those works that I haven't played, and others that I'd really like to play a lot more. For example, like the Britain, the Berg, which you mentioned. And also with my quartet, almost every quartet is a masterpiece, really.
You founded your own quartet recently, I think, have you?
Yeah, it's quite recent.
At the Albion Quartet?
That's
Yeah,
right.
and you're the leader, of course.
Theoretically.
And you also have your own festival, Honeymead Festival.
That's right.
Is that where you live?
It's my family home. It's where my father grew up and my grandmother lived, and we spent all our sort of holidays there on Exmoor. And the festival was really founded as a chance to have a week away from the busyness of normal life to really explore a couple of chamber works in detail. And then we play 4 concerts in the surrounding area, each one benefiting a local charity. So there's a real sense of ownership in the community and giving back to the community, and that it's really for them, which of course it is, but it, particularly in the beginning, I think really helped to build that sense of community festival. Well,
as the festival director, I suppose in a way you have a say as to what is performed and what's put on.
Yeah. I do. There's not a huge amount of classical music on Exmoor in that area, and I've had to sort of build up quite carefully. We have done a couple of new works. We've done some Britain, some other 20th century things, but it does take. You have to earn their trust, earn the audience's trust, really, that they know that they are going to enjoy it.
And they return, do they, each
yes,
year?
they do. They do.
Yeah. And do you also decide what music the quartet will play?
We decide that all together.
I see. So it's democratic.
It is indeed.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very democratic.
So you're the leader, perhaps only in name. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the first violin, but I think, as you know, with the quartet, the roles are always changing in the music and in the personalities. So we have a very democratic way of working. And I'm definitely not leading all the time.
Well, when you're dealing, I would say, when you're working with David, does he say he would like you to play a certain work, or does he say, we would like you to play with us, what would you like to play?
I think you put forward a couple of ideas, and then we discuss them. We need to obviously make programs that work for the whole orchestra and that work for me.
So you might say, come and play as long as it's Mozart. So you've got 5 choices. You've got 5 choices.
Well, I mean, the lovely thing working with Tamsin is that we've done so many concerts now and performed so many concertos together. But I think, obviously with chamber orchestra, the repertoire doesn't include, we're not going to be doing the Sibelius. Mind you, we've done the Tchaikovsky a couple of times, haven't we? And Beethoven, and I think, but I
think
think
the Mendelssohn as well.
Yes.
I don't think we've done the Tchaikovsky here.
No, we did it.
But Sibelius is quite a big orchestra.
Sibelius is big, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not really chamber orchestra repertoire.
No.
But I think with any soloist, there's always a dialogue of what the size of the orchestra we've got available, what the rest of the program is going to be, and the same if we're working with a composer. It's a question of I always like to talk to composers to see what other repertoire they feel frames their work and provides a suitable context. So I think it's and if Tamsin said to me just yesterday, we were saying it'd be really nice to think of some ideas for 2-3 years hence. And if Tamsin came to me and said, "Oh, David, in 20 whenever, I'd really like to do X concerto. Is there a possibility of doing it?" Then with that sort of planning, we can do it because it's a collaborative process, and I think when it really works, it's great.
This projected work with Freya,
yes,
Tasmin's sister, is it going to be done here?
Hopefully, yes. We haven't. Tamsin's Freya's going to be our resident composer or associate composer, 2019 to 2020. That season.
I noticed from the little brochure here of this season, it says friendly classics. Whose idea was that?
Don't know.
Because I wondered if having...
Perhaps next season we'll do unfriendly classics.
No, but to me it implies the sort of music that everyone will want to hear.
I think, well, hopefully everyone will want to hear a huge variety of repertoire. It's a really lovely way of putting it. It would be unthinkable for anyone here not to read a book written in the 20th century. Nobody would think of doing that. And I suppose what I meant by that, if it was me, it probably was, I'm guilty blood, is the approach that we have, that it's the ambience and atmosphere that we try and create as an orchestra. And I know I've said this before, I said it last night, but I do like to work on the premise that an audience consists of old friends and friends we're about to make. And it's that approach and I think in some respects it's easier with the chamber orchestra in a smaller venue to have that feeling of family, of engagement, and it's not about the orchestra sitting up here and playing at you, but again, I think Tamsin mentioned active participation. In some repertoire, or the pieces that she was talking about, it really obviously has to have active participation, but I'd like all audiences to be actively participating, really listening, really on the edge of your seat. And the Mozart concerto this afternoon, I'm sure many of you know it really well, but I would really ask you not after the interval when we've put the concerto to sort of sit back in your chairs thinking, oh yes, we know this, we'll sit back and relax and enjoy this. Obviously I want you to enjoy it, but I'd love you to all be on the edge of your seats.
Yes, but if Tamsin does her job properly, she will have people and you on the edge of your seat.
Yes, yeah.
Because something unexpected might happen.
But I think and I think there's a real challenge for us as performers that every time we perform, without resorting to any gimmickry, that every performance should be as fresh as the premiere. And I think that's one of the values of premiering a lot of new work. I think for both audiences and performers, for me, it reminds me constantly that, imagine being at the premiere of the Grosse Fuge. I mean, and I think we all, and I would include audiences in this, when there's a very familiar work in the programme, the New World Symphony, we all think we know the New World Symphony. There's so much, every time I conduct it, there's so much to explore and discover every time. And I've got no time for some people in our profession who will say, oh, not another Tchaikovsky, oh, not another New World. Oh, I've done that a million times. There's no, I don't think there should be any room for people like that to perform. It does a huge disservice. There's a great book by Eric Leinsdorf, The Composer's Advocate. I don't know if you've read it, Tamsin, but in the opening preface, he says that as musicians, we have fantastic responsibility and, I can't remember what the other word is he uses now, but fantastic responsibility because every day we work with genius. And I was thinking that as we were rehearsing that last movement of the Mozart, every day we are so privileged. That's it. We have a fantastic privilege and a responsibility as performers to, because
you
genius.
You can't be bored by Mozart, can you?
No, ever, never.
No. And we won't be bored this afternoon, I'm sure.
I hope not.
I understand that Mozart originally wrote this piece for himself, but then he had a successor at Salzburg who was a better violinist, so he made it more difficult.
Is that so?
I read it somewhere.
Yeah.
It might be in the program notes as well, I
yes.
don't know. Do you find it particularly difficult?
I think all of the Mozart concertos are difficult because they're so sort of crystalline. There's a innocence and purity about them. So they're very exposed, and that's what's difficult about them. It's funny because people always say, is this difficult? Is that difficult? What's more difficult than, which is more difficult? And I actually think that doing anything well is really difficult, and particularly the simplest things.
Yes. Well, the thing about Mozart is, it's been said many times, he sounds easier. He's more difficult rather than he sounds.
Yes. Well, because it needs such simplicity and directness, and that takes a lot of study to really know how to do that.
Yes, it's interesting because some performers, not necessarily violinists, they're wonderful at the very expansive, spectacular works, but then give them something really simple, well, not simple, but clear cut, like Mozart, and they find it difficult to put the meaning into it.
Mozart is very, very difficult. It's a lot of chamber groups find it very difficult because it's also a very sort of personal thing. There's so many details of exactly how you use the bow, articulation, vibrato, all kinds of stylistic things which really need so much thought, and it takes a lot of work to make them sound natural, particularly playing on modern instruments and imagining the sound that they would have had then. Not that we necessarily want to create that, but I think the awareness is important.
As we're here separately from the, different audience perhaps, because more people we hope will be at the concert than at the talk, although many of them are here, I'm sure now. But do you think there's anything special they should listen to when you do the concerto in a few minutes' time?
Yes. I think there's really lovely interplay between the solo line and the orchestra. It's a real chamber concerto. So there's a huge amount of dialogue that happens between the violin and the violin sections, the viola, even the cellos and basses. The wind have beautiful sustained high lines which sort of highlight the harmonies, particularly in the slow movement. And I do think the slow movement is a real gem. It's absolutely beautiful sort of aria, and in fact I think that's the case in most of the Mozart violin concertos, is the soul of the pieces are in the slow movements.
Yes, it's a very thin divide between the concertos and some of the opera.
It is.
Yes,
very thin.
So you'll be listening as well as conducting, I take it.
One of the joys of doing work with Tamsin, who knows the orchestra well, the orchestra knows Tamsin. I mean, a lot of the time, it depends what you call conducting. And actually, I know we had a very nice review from your colleague, from Chris Morley. Well, I took it as a compliment. And it was when we were doing the Lark Ascending here. And Chris wrote in his review, "Curtis is clearly a conductor who knows when not to." And I think there's a lot in that. If it's going well, keep out of the way. And, the Mozart, much of the time, I just, I might smile at the horns, or I might just, nod at the violas or whatever. But I think conducting is I think definitely less is more. actually,
Yes.
particularly in a refined piece of chamber music, which this is. And I need to do the odd little bit here and there, but I think, the less the better.
Well, as one cynic said, the purpose of a conductor is to make them start together and finish together, and the rest.
Well, and just recently, I was working with a big string orchestra, youth orchestra festival in Korea, and we were doing this insane Steve Martland arrangement of the Bach Toccata and Fugue. I think it's wonderful. It's absolutely incredible. I had a string orchestra of 85. It sounded terrific. And when we were rehearsing, we started the fugue, and it wasn't very well together. And I said, okay, let's do it. I'll say go, more or less, and we'll play it without me conducting. And it was, it wasn't perfect, but they started, and I stopped after the first bar. And because they were listening, they really they managed to get through and this is just a youth orchestra. They'd only met the day before, so they'd come from schools all over the Far East, and they managed to play it through. And I did say, I think in some respects, working with an orchestra like that, one of my aims is almost to make myself redundant, actually. I didn't tell the manager that because I'll get my fee deducted. But.
Exactly, yeah. well, you'll never do that with the orchestra of the Swan.
Well,
there won't be any purpose to have a pre-concert talk if you're not here.
I think that the whole role of conductor is there are a lot of different ways of conducting, and I think if an orchestra and a soloist are really working well together, then letting them get on with it and not getting in the way, and not over conducting. I think to me, I do see some conductors on the podium whose prime aim seems to be as flamboyant and I don't do. I'll just do the socks.
That's it.
We'd better actually look. It's 5 past. We'd better let Tamsin go.
Yes, you were only going to stay for 15 minutes.
Yes.
I'm awfully sorry we've
No.
kept you for the whole talk.
Pleasure.
Anyway, have a rest, and
Yes.
we'll look forward to hearing you a little later on.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, David. Yeah. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks for listening. To find out more, visit thsh.co.uk.